grasping grammar, mastering, should, and ought to, for advice. Hello there, English learners. In today's lesson, we are going to explore modal verbs, specifically, should, and ought to. These are incredibly useful when you want to give advice or make suggestions. They might seem tricky, but don't worry, by the end of this video, you'll master their usage. So, let's dive in. Modal verbs are a unique kind of verbs in English. They help us to express a variety of moods and attitudes such as ability, necessity, possibility, and advice. Today, we are focusing on the modal verbs used for giving advice, should, and ought to. Should is a modal verb that is frequently used in English to give advice or suggest something. For instance, if your friend is feeling sick, you might say, "You should see a doctor." This is a friendly piece of advice suggesting an action that would be beneficial. Remember, the structure is subject plus should plus base form of the verb. For example, we should study for the test. You should eat more vegetables. They should arrive early to secure good seats. Ought to is another modal verb used to give advice, and it is pretty similar to should. It's a bit more formal but less commonly used in everyday conversation. The structure is subject plus ought to plus base form of the verb. For instance, you ought to try this new restaurant. We ought to apologize for our mistake. He ought to read more to improve his vocabulary. Although ought to is less common, it's still important to understand and recognize it. While should and ought to can be used interchangeably in most contexts, there are subtle differences. As mentioned, ought to is a bit more formal and less common, especially in American English. Additionally, in negative sentences and questions, should is typically preferred. For example, you shouldn't smoke, more common than you oughtn't to smoke. Should I take this job? More common than ought I to take this job? And that's a wrap for today's lesson on using should and ought to for giving advice. Remember, practice makes perfect. So, try using these modal verbs in your daily conversation to give advice or make suggestions. I hope this video has been helpful, and as always, keep up your English language journey. Until next time, happy learning!